Okay. Now, the dollar is going down versus the gold price and the silver price. I'm expecting by the end of the year, Chris, we're going to get past the $40 silver barrier, and you're going to be looking at all that silver behind you as worth a lot more.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and well, hopefully you enjoyed part one of Jim Willie last night. And if you want to hear his latest thoughts on gold and silver, well, tonight is your night, and here we go. Well, Jim, speaking of things that are going to happen in the next year, I mean, obviously these are high-level negotiations, but can you say anything about yet as we hear that Trump is getting ready to pick the replacement for Powell at the Fed? What has the dialogue been about them trying to secure Jim Willie's services as next Federal Reserve Chairman? I'm somehow the Hill did not have you on their list of five people. Although, check this out. This is interesting. They list Scott Bessent as one
Yeah,
of
I know.
the
That's the main name
candidates.
I
That'd
hear.
be wild.
But
I,
what about
I, I
what
would
about
love to
this?
have him talking publicly more often. Remind me of Frank Drebin, which is what always pops into my head
Well,
when he
what
speaks.
about the Washington D.C. Senator Homer Simpson?
He did not appear on this list. Clearly, this list is outdated.
The list is therefore lacking. Um,
Jim, would you agree, though, that if, based on what Trump has been saying, and he hasn't hidden his feelings about that, I've heard he wants lower interest rates. So, can you tell me that this man would not be the perfect? I mean, like, wouldn't Bernanke really be perfect for what he wants? He could do quantitative easing, cut
I,
your interest rates.
he might, but
He could come in,
he
he could cut Canada's interest rates, Germany,
well
everybody's interest rates. Can he do
he's
that?
got big wading boots with blood on them. I'm afraid. I think it's going to be if it's going to be a replacement. I don't think it's going to be soon. I don't think the cabal is going to cave in like that. They're not going to want the symbolic message there that Trump is pushing around the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is not the same Fed that we knew 4 years ago. It's not the same structure. It's not the same board, but it's much the same loyalties. I think it's going to be Scott Bessent. Um, why would it not be? Um, he's the Treasury Secretary. I heard rumblings 2 months after he took the job that he didn't really like the job much. It had a lot of routine BS work. I think he'd much prefer being involved in you know, let's just say the Wild West wing of the Department of Treasury, which is the Federal Reserve. It's a Wild West. They don't have a lot of rules. Um, they're involved with insider trading. They're involved with managing the Exchange Stabilization Fund. They're involved with under the table dealings. Well, the Treasury does a lot of the dollar swaps, but okay, a lot of the management and a lot of the thinking is done at the New York Fed. Um, I've regarded the New York Fed as um, the main office of the Federal Reserve, the New York Fed. And that was Dudley for years and years and years, Dudley. Um, I think it's going to be Bessent, but I don't think it's going to be anytime real soon. The deep state and BlackRock and Powell are going to want to find a way that they can have a ramp and give a reason why Powell will walk on that ramp. And it's not going to be a ramp off the ship with hands behind his back, feeding the sharks like in the old pirate days. I think it's going to be a ramp into like an island. I don't know necessarily it'll be like a Virgin Island. Um, Bessent. That's I don't have a number two guess. I really don't, except the D.C. Senator Homer Simpson.
Well, there we go. Jim Willie taking Scotty Bessent in the box pool and being incredibly sly and understated on his own candidacy for Fed Treasury. But I would take Jim as my second box. I'd throw in a couple allowances for the Janet Yellen box, and obviously I want the Bernanke. Although Jim, you mentioned the I would say the only thing sillier than perhaps the idea of the 2% inflation mandate, which I've heard Judy Woods mention that even Paul Volcker described as skimming and said his mother would see right through that. Greenspan questioned it. And actually, Jerome Powell gave a speech back on May 15th. I don't know if you heard this. This didn't get much attention, and I'll pull it up in a minute. But basically, he said they're already discussing inflation targeting. They said because in cases where there's an inflation shortfall, they could let it run hotter than the 2% mandate. Now, Jim, I know your next question. I'll read your mind for you here. You're saying, well, what is the policy to deal with the inflation surplus we've been left with and are still paying for? See, even the CPI index up 25% since COVID. Yet, all of that silliness aside, there's also this one. So you have the 2% mandate, which, by the way, I guess the other part was that was written into policy. You know who finally made that official Fed policy, Jim? There you go. That was actually Bernanke. Helicopter Ben is the one who actually made the mandate official that his predecessors basically said was complete horseshit. Although Whopper number two, right after the Fed's 2% inflation mandate, I mean, I'm amazed that, every time Trump says this or that about Powell, and I always find it silly. Like Powell says, well, I can't comment on, how fast the debt is going up because that's a fiscal. I mean, it seems a little ridiculous. The guy who's directly involved with the interest rates, not allowed to have any opinion, and even more so because he can sit here with his central bank independence, which we all know is a charade. And I'll read this. I'm guessing you've probably heard this, but for everyone watching at home who may not have, Andrew Ross Sorkin reports on Paul Volcker's new book, Keeping at It, The Quest for Sound Money and Good Government. While President Trump has complained in recent months about the Fed's plan to raise interest rates, and this is from a few years ago, he isn't the first to try and influence the independent Federal Reserve. Mr. Volcker recounts being summoned to meet with President Ronald Reagan and his chief of staff, James Baker, in the library next to the Oval Office. Reagan didn't say a word, Volcker wrote. Instead, Baker delivered a message. The president is ordering you not to raise interest rates before the election. And Volcker says, I was stunned. I later surmised that the library location had been chosen because it probably lacked a taping device. So basically, when you're going to violate the policies that you send and tell everybody is what you're following, but you don't want them to know that it's complete bullshit, find a room where they're not being taped. Yet, Jim, perhaps this will be our question here. Wondering if you can explain this one. So, Trump has talked about how there's no inflation. He actually said no inflation. He wrote that letter to Powell last week, put no inflation in there. Now, that's despite every inflation metric still above the Fed's alleged 2% mandate. Here's core CPI. You can see we have to go, when was the last time we were under 2? In 2021. So 4 years above 2%. So when Trump's saying there's no inflation, now you could say it's lower than it was, but when he's saying there's no inflation, he's saying that, and I think we can agree that the government metrics quite generously understated, yet they're still over 2%. Here was the PCE, the Fed's preferred useless inflation metric, actually showed an increase last month. And Jim, this has all been happening while you got to see oil here back in beginning of the year up at 75 bucks. I'm guessing that now that the oil price is going back up, the inflation numbers aren't going to be coming back down. I think that you want to know why the inflation numbers are coming back down? I would suggest that has a lot to do with it. And then where does this all lead? Here's their summary of economic projections from the last meeting. Here's core PC inflation. So in March, they had in 2025 that PCE core was going to be 2.8%. So 3 months later, they raised their forecast. They're saying now it's not going to be 2.8%. It's going to be 3.1%. Yet they're going to get inflation back down to 2%, even though it's going higher this year, according to them. By cutting interest rates further, that is the plan to bring inflation down to 2%, which seems about as realistic to me as the magic bullet theory, but that's why we get Jim on the show. Can you find a way that this makes any sense? Mr.
Chris,
Former Federal Reserve Chairman,
Chris, I I
Speaker.
have I have a policy and a rule that I don't waste my time reading the tea leaves of fecal matter. And I don't follow the PCE. I don't follow the CPI. I don't follow many of their statistics because they're all doctored. Let me make a certain point. There's a lot of confusion right now because gold is not following the real inflation rate, which is the CPI minus the interest rates. But the CPA is false. The CPI, Consumer Price Index, is false. And during the COVID period, it was wrong by 6 to 8%. Okay, the shadow government statistics has never matched up with the CPI. And when they do, I will begin to read their tea leaves with the CPI and the PCE, which is just a suppressed CPI. I don't read tea leaves of fecal matter. So I don't have a real strong opinion on a lot of what you just said because I don't pay attention to it. They lie on the CPI. It does not match the shadow government statistics from John Williams and almost never has. So I follow the CPI from John Williams, which is indeed coming down. And I'm not sure what the recent numbers are, since the Trump inauguration, but it was like 6 to 8% a year ago. Um, so I don't know how to answer your question except to say the battles are being fought over false statistics, false justification, and reasons that they don't tell us about. So I believe the bankers are going to give some orders to Powell on what to do. Yeah, there's your gap. Yeah, we're coming down. And I don't know what that is. I think it's we're down to
It
about
looks like
seven,
we're down from
about it,
12% to
down to
finally
eight,
under 8%.
7 point something, the seven handle. And the official rate is saying something like four. Um, oh no, is the red the other
Red
less
is the
falsified?
official, and blue
Official.
is if
Okay.
you use the 1990 formula.
Okay. All right. Because there are two different, more honest um, CPIs, and I don't like to get people confused.
But Jim, you
It's
can see they got it under control. Here's that speech I was talking about. This is from Jerome Powell. Given downside risk to employment and inflation, we said that following periods in which inflation has been running persistently below 2%, we would likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time.
this is
So
reading
there,
of tea leaves of fecal matter. I don't get involved with this, Chris. I don't
well,
have an
I want to give
opinion.
you one more fecal tea leaf, if I
Okay.
may, and you'll put up with me. But here
Okay,
was
it's
the
okay.
thing that was wild because he's there a couple paragraphs ago. He's talking about inflation shortfalls, while even his PC and whatever metric you want to use is over the target. And then also, he mentions this later higher real rates may also reflect the possibility that inflation could be more volatile going forward. We may be entering a period of more frequent and potentially more persistent supply shocks. So I don't know if
We're
we're
gonna
going to get
we're,
his
we're gonna
inflation
get the opposite.
shortage.
We get the opposite of what they say. What were they saying 3 or 4 years ago? That
It's
we have inflation under
transitory.
control, everything's under control, inventories will be restored, everything's fine. And we saw like 13, 14% CPI according to the shadow government statistics. By the way, I got to mention something called the Chapwood
Oh, I love
CPI.
them. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, they sample 500 different things, and there include services like you know water and septic and insurance, things like that. Um, they sample from 50 cities, 500 different objects.
Their data is not. is also not indicating the potential inflation shortage that we are seeing the Fed incredibly concerned about.
What is the year? Is that 2023? That's the last I've seen of Chapwood.
There's 22, 23, 24. So New York does not seem to be experiencing an inflation shortage.
Okay, they're
I don't
all
know
over
if Fort
10.
Lauderdale is on this list, but I can confirm we're not
Well,
suffering from the inflation shortage
well,
here.
you might have Miami on there. All right, so I'm seeing a few numbers. The bigger the cities, the more they're over 10. And the moderate sized cities tend to be between 8 and 10. All right, we're not seeing any big slowdown in real world price inflation. Therefore, everything that Powell talks about, I basically ignore.
There's Miami not struggling with the inflation shortage yet either.
What do you got there? Don't move too fast. Is that an eight handle?
That's 10%. What do we got? They
What's that?
dip
What's that
below
one?
10%. So
Okay.
if
All right. Nine.
Powell raises the inflation mandate to from 2% to 10%, then you would be able to say that, at least according to the Chapwood Index in 2024, that
They're
Miami is suffering from
they're
the inflation shortage.
they're going to raise the threshold to something like three or three and a quarter. That's what I expect. And again, that's swimming in the tea leaves pool of fecal matter.
Jim,
So
could you
I
say it
don't.
again? I still wasn't quite catching what you're saying there.
Okay,
Could you?
that would be swimming in the pool of tea leaves in fecal matter.
Thank you.
We,
Now it's
I,
clear. Appreciate it.
I don't get involved in that. I get involved in reality, not debate in the pool of fecal matter. This is rubbish. Okay, what you're really going to see is, will the bankers tell Powell to lower rates? And if so, what justification will they use that's not the same justification as Donald Trump uses? And then they're going to say, we did it for other reasons, Donald. Leave me alone. Okay. The independence of the Fed is a very interesting concept. I don't get too caught up in it. What I'd like to talk lastly about is the widespread notion that the dollar is going to tank. And for the dollar to go down a lot, according to the dollar index, you have to have the euro go up. And I don't see any vitality, strength, or anything positive coming out of Europe. They're still stuck with the Russian sanctions. So that's harming their industry. They're still stuck with the nitrogen nonsense as a pollutant. So they got farm obstacles, obstructions. They still got a lot of migrant problems, which bring about violence and blocking streets in France and all kinds of rubbish. Rubbish. Okay.
Well,
Here's
Jim,
what?
before you tear into the dollar index like a hungry dog at a Korean barbecue, may I give you a question to set the context, and perhaps you could work that into what you're saying? Because here we see the dollar index, as we talked about early, was under par right before the 50 basis point rate cut last September. Then in January, gets briefly over 110, as you can see there. So about 2 weeks before Trump came in. And here's what I find interesting, though, because you have a fellow named Stephen Myron, who is Trump's chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors. Back in November, he wrote this paper, A User's Guide to Reconstructing the Global Trading System. This was in November of last year, and you can see the highlighted part here. It might be small, but it says the root of economic imbalances lies in persistent dollar overvaluation. Without going through the highlights, if anyone wants to look at this one, you can find several more comments. It was basically 41 pages where every other page he talked about persistent dollar overvaluation ad nauseum. I also, there's a fellow named Michael McNair who's written a thesis of how he's seen indications that some of Myron's strategy. So he wrote this in November. Trump names him as chairman of the Council of Advisors in December. Michael McNair, a couple months later, says he's seeing signs of this being implemented. So what I'm getting at is that we've heard JD Vance say that the dollar is overvalued. I believe Bessent said it multiple times. Myron. So everyone in their administration is talking about it. Potential signs that they're intervening in the market. So here we have the dollar is down. I think it's 12.5%. A huge move, basically, since Trump has come in. Do you think that it's possible that the dollar is lower because the Trump administration has been involved in intervening to make it lower? I'm not saying I know that. I'm asking if you think that that could be possible.
Okay, in order to get I think, a better perspective, I would ask you to put up a 5-year chart. I think you got a 1-year chart, maybe 2.
5 years for my friend Jim.
Okay, that's not a disastrous move. We're lower than the Obama 3 administration that's often called the Biden show. We're lower than that. All right. Do we see any strength in the euro? Is the euro up in the currency exchange rate? I don't think the euro is strong. They still got the Russian sanctions. They still got the nitrogen as a pollutant. They're so upside down, head up their ass, that they think carbon dioxide is a threat to life. Um, they're morons. They're political morons. Um,
How
okay,
do you really feel about the
that is
Eurozone? Wasn't
way,
clear.
way too high. That euro is way, way too high. Okay, I think we're going to see the euro come down, the dollar come back up. Where the dollar is weak is with respect to purchasing power and the gold price, not the index. The dollar buys less, so the dollar's weaker. The dollar is down versus gold. Gold's up in the dollar terms. The dollar is not down versus the other competitive toilet papers that compose the dollar index. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but is not the dollar index 52% euro?
I
How can the
will correct you. I believe you are slightly off because I think it's even higher than that.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
70% is the
No, it's not 70.
euro and the yen. I'll pull it up here. But I mean, it's
Get the
basically the euro, the yen, and the British pound is 70 or 80%, and I'll let you continue.
but the euro for a long time was 52% and fixed.
Oh, Jim, you're going to be impressed with your young buck here, pressing the old sensei. This is like Karate Kid, where I'm getting Mr. Miyagi to be proud.
Okay.
You
All
know,
right, come on.
white wax on,
What is it?
keep scrubbing the floor. There you go. It was higher than 52%. Euro
What
at
is it?
57.6.
57. 57.
Japan takes that up to 71.2%, and then you add on the pound, about another 12%, so
What is the yen alone? 72.
13.6.
13.6. Okay, and what is the pound?
The pound sterling 11.9.
Okay. All right. So why is
They're lucky
okay.
the Swiss franc is a higher percentage. And that's one of the things that's incredible is that you're seeing this move in the dollar at the same time the ECB's been cutting rates. Swiss just took their rate down to zero, and dollar index is still struggling mightily.
What is the Swiss franc percentage?
3.6%, sir. Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
What is another percent in there? What else
The
is there?
Swedish krona has 4.2%, Mr. Chairman, and the Canadian dollar has 9.1%, Mr. Chairman.
9.1. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Canadian. So the Canadian is almost as big as Britain.
Almost, Jimmy. I mean, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. The European weight is absolute nonsense. And that's why I don't buy the argument that a dollar is going to go down in the dollar index in those terms, and therefore we need to watch it. It's an anti-euro index. When it goes down, the euro goes up. The euro is up too much. I got to tell you a quick story, and it was for the mentor to The Voice. The Voice was my big source of information from 2008 to about 2015. He introduced me to his mentor, who was the former CEO of a German multinational giant corporation. His mentor, the Voice's mentor. Let's just call him Mr. X. And he was German. And the German Mr. X said to me, the Euro Central Bank will never raise their will never lower their interest rates to compete with the United States. And I said, when the euro is over 115 and approaching 120, you're going to see the European Central Bank lower their rates because the German economy will not be able to compete so well with the euro so high. And he said, the euro will never go higher and the Euro Central Bank will never cut their rates. And I got both correct. And the German CEO retired of a giant corporation whose name I will not mention, admitted to me later through the Voice. Jim Willie got it right. I got it wrong. The pressure on the Euro Central Bank was enormous because the euro went too high, just as Jimmy said. All right. When the euro
High
goes
five,
up,
Mr. Chairman.
yeah, baby. All right. When the euro is high, it harms their economy. So they ask for the dollar to please perk up and rise. So that's what's coming next. And that's not what I look at. I look at the purchasing power, which is food prices, fuel prices, insurance prices, the cost of cable television, the important things.
Do you ever look at fecal tea leaves?
I barely look at my own feces. Okay, now the dollar is going down versus the gold price and the silver price. I'm expecting by the end of the year, Chris, we're going to get past the $40 silver barrier, and you're going to be looking at all that silver behind you as worth a lot more.
Look at my man Jimmy. By the way, Mr. Chairman, excuse me, that segue, silky smooth. I mean, he's covering the Fed dollar index without even me asking. I like how you slipped into gold and silver, which obviously everybody wants to hear your thoughts on.
The
We did
dollar's weak
start.
versus gold. How can you avoid it? It went from 1,800 a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, 1,800 to now 3,200, and it's stable. How can you ignore that? That's the dollar weakness.
You can't.
And
You can't do it.
silver's gone from mid 20s to low 30s. How can you avoid that? That's dollar weakness. And unfortunately, as the gold price goes up, so are food prices. And now we're finally seeing gasoline and diesel come down. I got a contact in the Southwest, in the California general area, and he's saying, Jim, we're still not profitable in trucking. We need diesel to come down more. Trucking. We don't have a distribution system based on railroads. It's based on trucking. We have a little bit of rail, but it's mostly trucking. And this guy is telling me, he gives me an update every few months. He said, we're getting better. We're actually right near break even. Trucking. They were losing money. They were losing a penny and a half per mile a year and a half ago, Chris. That's the effect of the fuel price. And notice Del Monte declared bankruptcy. Del Monte Foods. Okay, we're in trouble with the food chain. We need to get interest rates down, and justifiably. And we need to see lower interest rates. We need to see lower consumer price index. And I don't give a flying F what their PCE is. That's a device to control the economic growth. They don't even use the CPI to make the what is it? They have it's economic. It's the gross economic statistic. I can't think of the right word, but they bring in the PCI to make it inflation adjusted. Their adjustments are all kooky. They're all full of crapola. They don't use the John Williams shadow government statistic. Chris, if they did, they'd have to admit that we had about a 6 or 8 year depression, economic depression. I think we had about a minus 10% depression during the lockdown and the following year. 10% depression. We have a shrinking economy. We're not growing. We're slowing down on the depression. We need to grow.
Well,
We're
Jim,
still
I
having layoffs. The layoffs are still all over the place.
well, it's fortunate. Obviously, you have your statistical background, so any thought, I mean, maybe one day we'll get the Jim Willie PI or
No, I don't need to. We got shadow government statistics, and I wouldn't mind working for them, but I think it would be boring work. Very boring.
maybe again you could just be the spokesman and then people say like, "Oh, this is the one that Jim Willie looks at," and that'll
You've got a
spread
much higher.
throughout the globe like wildfire and with your international contacts and foreign central bank
Uh,
counterparties.
Chris, I'm just trying to survive the severe attacks that continue, and I gotta mention my website and sign off. But my website is golden-jackass.com. I can't handle all the blows, the slings and arrows that I am being given. I cannot handle it all. I need donations. I need regular subscriptions. I need sponsors. And I'm telling you, this is a very dangerous game that we're in. If you identify fraud and go further to identify evil, like in trafficking, you get attacked. And I've been attacked now for 8 years. In yellow is the subscribe button. But I've also got a consult button. I'm available the next week or two for consults. I haven't done a lot recently, but I've done over 800 now, Chris, in 5.5 years, 800 consult calls. The sponsor button is my favorite. That's for a large donation. The donate button is for any amount you choose. In the middle in yellow is the subscribe button for making a new order. And I love the new orders. I love my clients. They're very kind to me. I just got a generous sponsor donation a few days ago, and I fall to my knees and thank the Lord. Most of them are Christians. There's a mix in there. I call them truth warriors. You're defending the truth, and the people who lie and commit fraud are trying to harm you, and they are. They've harmed me. I've been harmed pretty bad. When I do consult calls, I talk more about it, but I've got some new protocol rules, and I'm going to stay above the fray a little bit. I'll only talk about money laundering as an issue. And I think NATO is going to be involved very heavily in money laundering dependents to continue their war. And that's a really big point that I'm making.
I like it,
Um,
Jim. Stay out of the heavy stuff. Just leave it to money laundering. Not any deeper than that. Keep it nice and kosher. And by the way, I will mention to our audience, Jim asked me before we started if I had ever heard the term kosher before, to which I responded that I also did get electricity last week. Jim, question here. I see that you're on my buddy Sean from SGT, good man over there, and see you. We're talking about some seismic shifts and all that gold there. The one other thing that was on my list here. What's going on with that Fort Knox audit? I mean, I know is now that Elon's gone, did that go with him? But we had all the hoopla around that. And have you heard anything further?
yeah, I've heard some pretty definitive things.
Ooh.
Trump was told, according to my buzz, Trump was told that they could not identify the owners, so they wanted to avoid the leasing issue. And there's still quite a few tungsten bars there, and there's a lot less gold than they want to admit. But the main issue is leasing, multiple leasing. Okay, if they show a bunch of gold, then the following question would be, who's the owner? Did you prove the owner? No, they did not prove the owner, so we're not going to do the audit. There's gold in Fort Knox. There's gold at West Point, and there's gold at the Federal Reserve in New York. So maybe that's where they'll do the audits. Fort Knox is largely um, it's largely a warehouse for nerve gas. There's more nerve gas in there than there is gold. Um,
Yeah,
you know, the,
actually, I've heard. What is it? They also have. Was it opium, or there's like a whole list of wild stuff that's stored in there, aside from
well,
just the
well,
gold.
Langley needs a storage center. So, I mean, where are they going to put all their heroin and opium? Okay. Um, we're moving, I don't think closer to an audit. I think we're moving closer to a gold standard. We don't need an audit of Fort Knox in order to institute a gold standard and a new dollar. It's going to be shoved down our throats. And I think we've got a transition going on right now where we need lower short-term bond yields in order to make sure that the Treasury bills are used in order to create collateral for the stable coins, which we didn't get into at all. The Treasury bonds need to be shoved into stable coin territory. And I believe we're going to see a lot of Forex reserves being converted to stablecoin, and there's a hitch right now that the bond yield for most of the treasury bonds held by central banks is too high. They don't qualify for stablecoin, so there's going to have to be a bond rally in order to move into digital territory. And with that conversion at the high end, the low end is going to be trade payments done in XRP. XRP and Ripple talk about winning 20%, 15% of SWIFT. I think they're going to win 40 to 60%. They talk about winning 20% of cross-border trade payment. I think they're going to win over 60%. And that's how XRP goes way past 100. And it's only $2 something right now. I think it's going to go way over 200, over 100, way over 100 and probably over 200. And when it does, you're going to be seeing a lot less of me.
Jim, I also think maybe we could add a button here for vault auditing services, and that way, if you're not sure what's going on in Fort Knox, you could come in and help.
I, I'm not interested in that because that's how you get a bullet in the back of your head when you're walking down the street.
Yeah, but just
Okay.
think about how safe the American people would feel if they know that Jim Willie had
If
audited the
Jim
Fort
Willie,
Knox. It's not the same as if the
yeah,
Treasury or some
if Jim
agency
Willie
does
had a
it.
bullet in the back of his head.
Jim
Um,
Willie's stamp of just the level of quality
Trump
associated with the brand.
was told, don't fulfill the audit promise, work your way around it. Because if they dug in deep to the leasing, they would have found that the Fort Knox gold and the New York Fed gold and the West Point gold was multiply leased, like at least, I think at least 4 or 5 times. So they left it alone. So people would not get a bullet in the back of the head. They left it alone. And so would I. I'm not interested in that. Um, Chris, it's great being on. You're
Only
a
so
funny.
many world crises you can solve in one day, Jim. So we'll let somebody else handle that.
Well, here's a funny tidbit. 70 British towns and little cities have a Muslim mayor. 70. Let that sink in. So, where do you think we need some reform across the Atlantic pond? You've got almost more Islamic mosques in France than you do Christian churches. Where do you think we need the reform across the Atlantic pond? You still got a lot of morons in Germany believing their news, which is delivered by spoonfuls from Langley hands. Where do you think we need reform across the Atlantic pond? Britain, France, Germany. Let's start there.
Well, I hear you, Jim, and I'll just say Vegas is upended right now. I think we're in minute 80, and this is the first time you called someone a moron in today's episode, and I don't think anyone would have taken the
Well,
oath
I
on that.
substituted fecal matter and tea leaves. I thought I'd, become more gentlemanly.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't, you got some points on the board there, so I commend you for that, Mr. Chairman. And fortunately, we'll say as we wrap up here that if you want to know how Jim feels the mayoral policy in countries across the globe should work, what he plans to do if he does indeed take over as the next Federal Reserve chairman. And well, I guess, Jim, it sounds like you're passing on the opportunity to audit Fort Knox, which, wow, that would be fun. But when you find out scoops about Fort Knox, well, people can go to Jackass. And if you
Sign up,
subscribe, you have two yellow buttons, Jim. Maybe
sign up or
might want
donate.
to might
Those
need
are
to
yellow.
change
No,
one of
no,
these to pink.
no,
So
no.
more
Sign
exclusive
up in
color
yellow
coding.
and donate in yellow. Those are the magic buttons. And
Okay,
hit the
so just
sponsor button if you're a
hit any
millionaire.
just go to Jackass, aim for anything yellow, and one way or another
and
it'll work
and
out.
hit the sponsor button if you're a multimillionaire. Please help me out.
And Jim,
I'm
is
a
this what happens to, is this like a testimonial that if you subscribe, then you end up with a mule loaded with gold nuggets like that? Is that what is the implication there?
No, that's just something that my original website manager came up with, and she was a gem. Her name was Donna. She was a gem, and she was my website manager until 2019. So she was 15 years. Now I have 6 years from a guy in the Netherlands, a
Mm.
really good guy, smart guy, bilingual, and it's in the Netherlands, and I care deeply about him. He's a good buddy, good friend.
Well, Jim, did
Thanks for having
she,
me on.
well, just one last question. Did she
Uh,
happen to have the pleasure of meeting your cat, Tiffany, who in previous episodes you explained the dynamics between the way Tiffany would circle and then eventually kill the mouse, and you drew the incredible parallel to that and what China is doing to the US bond market, which was special only to be outdone by your analysis on the horse and buggy whip market last time.
no,
That's one of
she
my favorite moments of you ever. And I even chopped out a clip that I love sending to my buddies because at the end you're like, "Well, the horse and buggy whips are going to come back. How'd that work out?" And then you do this, after the how'd that work out, you do this eye roll and just leave it there. I don't know if they
um
have Oscars for this type of stuff, but
let me just
it
say
was
that
powerful.
Tiffany was a long-haired female black cat that I had in the western suburbs. It's actually Natick, Massachusetts. Natick, the
That's where
home
you
of
met
Doug.
Doug Flutie.
I actually bumped into Doug Clutie and talked to him for 5 minutes. Yep, yep. And here he came up to here on my height. He came up to here. Um, but Tiffany was the most wonderful pet I've ever had in my life, and I miss her. And when I did roof work, I did one each summer. I did 1/3 of the roof. And when I was up there working on the roof, like after work on a long July or June evening at 7 o'clock after work p.m., Tiffany would climb a fence and leap onto the roof and sit right next to where I was working. The most touching, oh, I'm getting tingles. I'm telling you, most touching gesture ever from a pet. Um, and that left behind the circling of the mouse. Oh my gosh. We allowed her to kill the mouse and to eat it. We wanted to witness it, and it was gruesome. It was gruesome. Um, when the tail was sticking out of her mouth and she's walking away. Oh my gosh. Okay. Thanks for having me on, Chris. It's always fun. And pardon me for talking too loud. I just get very intense. It's been interesting, and I thank you very deeply. Thanks for all you do, and thanks for being a friend. Oh my gosh. We're
Well,
in a
well,
war.
I'm going
We're
to
in a war.
reverse that and reclaim all the thanks on this side of the table for another legendary performance, Mr. Chairman. This was well done. Wait till Craig Hemke finds out about your new nickname. That's I
He
still have to listen to your. I haven't
he
downloaded your call with him from last week,
he
but
doesn't engage in that sort of stuff. I call him Lord Hemke, and
I
he
know.
doesn't he doesn't come back with a return.
Well, he just didn't.
He just calls me the jackass, the jackass.
He's been busy, maybe not ascertaining your importance in the financial realm, but honored to have done so here today. And folks at home, thank you for tuning in and watching. Hope you enjoyed our call with Jim. And again, you can find him at golden-jackass.com. The most handsome man in the finance business in any country on the globe. Jim, take good care of yourself, buddy, and we'll check in again soon.
Okay, thanks a bunch, and give me one of those silver bars, will you?
It's on its way.
Okay.